Once a devotee asked Bhagwan Sri Raman Maharishi, is it possible to enjoy samadhi while busy with worldly work? Bhagwan said, it is the feeling I work that is the hindrance. Ask yourself who works. Remember who you are, then the work will not bind you. It will go on automatically. Make no effort either to work or to renounce. Your effort is the bondage. What is destined to happen will happen. If you are destined to work, you will not be able to avoid it. You will be forced to engage in it. So leave it to the higher power. It is not really your choice whether you renounce or retain as you choose. When women carrying jars of water on their heads stop to talk, they are very careful keeping their mind on the water jars. Similarly, when a sage engages in activity, his mind remains fixed in the self and his activity doesn't distract him. Devotee asked, I believe celibacy is necessary even for a householder if he is to succeed in self inquiry. Am I right? Bhagwan said, first find out who the wife and husband are, then the question will not arise. Devotee asked, is not brahmacharya celibacy necessary for realization of the self? Bhagwan said, brahmacharya means living in Brahm. It has no connection with celibacy as commonly understood. A real brahmachari is one who lives in Brahm and finds bliss in Brahm, which is the same as the self. Why then should he look for other sources of happiness? In fact, it is emergence from the self that is the cause of all misery. Devotee asked, but is not celibacy necessary for yoga? Bhagwan said, it is one aid to realization among many others. Devotee asked, then it is not indispensable. Can a married man realize the self? Bhagwan said, certainly. It is a question of fitness of mind, married or not unmarried. A man can realize the self because the self is here and now. If it were not but were obtainable by some effort at some future time, if it were something new to be acquired, it would not be worth seeking, because what is not natural cannot be permanent. What I say is that the self is here and now, and that it alone is. Devotee asks, is it necessary to take sannyasa, a vow of renunciation, in order to attain self realization? Bhagwan said sannyasa means renouncing one's individuality, not shaving one's head and putting on ochre robes. A man may be a householder, but if he does not think he is one, he is a sannyasin. On the other hand, he may wear ochre robes and wander about, but so long as he thinks he is a sannyasin, he is not one. To think about one's renunciation defeats the purpose of renouncing. What do you mean by taking sannyasa? Do you think it means leaving your home or wearing robes of a certain color wherever you go? Even if you fly up into the air, will your mind not go with you? Or can you leave it behind you and go without it? Why should your occupation or duties in life interfere with your spiritual effort? For instance, there is a difference between your activities at home and in the office. In your office activities, you are detached, and so long as you do your duty, you do not care what happens or whether it results in gain or loss to the employer. Your duties at home, on the other hand, are performed with attachment, and you are all the time anxious whether they will bring advantage to you and your family. But it is possible to perform all the activities of life with detachment and regard only the self as real. It is wrong to suppose that if one is fixed in the self, one's duties in life will not be properly performed. It is like an actor. He dresses and acts and even feels the part he is playing, but he knows really that he is not that character but someone else in real life. In the same way, why should the body, consciousness, or the feeling I am the body disturb you? Once you know for certain that you are not the body but the self, nothing that the body does should shake you from abidance in the self. Such abidance will never interfere with the proper and effective discharge of whatever duties the body has any more than an actor's being aware of his real status in life interferes with his acting a part on the stage. Devotee asks, it has been definitely stated that so long as there is the least trace of the I am the doer idea, there can be no realization, but it is possible for a householder who earnestly desires liberation to fulfill his duties without this idea. Maharishi said, there is no principle that actions can be performed only on the basis of the I am the doer idea, and therefore there is no reason to ask whether they can be performed and the duties discharged without that idea. To take a common example, an accountant working all day in his office and scrupulously attending to his duties might seem to the spectator to be shouldering all the financial responsibilities of the institution, but knowing that he is not personally affected by the intake or outgoings, he remains unattached and free from the I am the doer feeling in doing his work, while at the same time he does it perfectly well. In the same way, it is quite possible for the wise householder who earnestly seeks liberation to discharge his duties in life, which after all are his destiny, without any attachment, regarding himself merely as an instrument for the purpose. Such activity is not an obstacle on the path of knowledge, nor does knowledge prevent a man from discharging his duties in life. Knowledge and activity are never mutually antagonistic, and the realization of one doesn't impede performance of the other, nor performance of one the realization of the doer. Devotee asked, what is the significance of the life of a spiritually minded householder who has a devote all his time merely to earning a living and supporting his family, and what mutual benefit do they get? Bhagwan said, the discharge of duties by householder such as this, who works for the support of his family, quite unmindful of his own physical comforts in life, should be regarded as selfless service rendered to his family, whose needs it is his destiny to meet. It may, however, be asked what benefit such a householder derives from the family. The answer is that there is no benefit for him from the family as such, since he has made the discharge of his duties to them a means of spiritual training, and since he finally obtains perfect contentment by realizing the supreme bliss of liberation, which is the ultimate goal of every path and the supreme reward. He therefore stands in need of nothing from the members of his family or from his family life. Devotee asked, how can a householder who is constantly engaged in the active discharge of his domestic duties, which should naturally impel him to still greater activity, obtain the supreme peace of withdrawal and freedom from the urge to such activity even while thus busily engaged? Bhagwan said, it is only to the spectator that the enlightened householder seems to be occupied with his domestic duties. For even though apparently engaged in domestic duties, he is not really engaged in any activity at all. His outer activity doesn't prevent him from realizing the perfect peace of withdrawal, and he is free from the restless urge to activity even in the midst of his activities. Visitor asked, "Should I retire from business and take to reading books on Vedanta?" Bhagwan said, "If objects have an independent existence, that is, if they exist somewhere apart from you, then it may be possible for you to retire from them. But they do not. They owe their existence to you, to your thought. So, where can you retire from them? As for reading books on Vedanta, you can go on reading any number, but they can only tell you to realize the self within you. The self cannot be found in books. You have to find it for yourself in yourself." Devotee asked, "Is a vow of silence useful?" Bhagwan said, "The inner silence is self surrender, and that means living without the sense of ego." Devotee asked, "Is solitude necessary for a sannyasin?" Bhagwan said, "Solitude is in the mind of a man. One man may be in the thick of the world and yet maintain perfect serenity of mind. Such a person is always in solitude. Another may live in the forest but still be unable to control his mind. He cannot be said to be in solitude. Solitude is an attitude of the mind. A man attached to the things of life cannot get solitude wherever he may be, whereas a detached man is always in solitude. The silence of solitude is forced. Restrained speech in society is equivalent to silence, for then a man controls his speech. There must be a speaker before there can be speech. If the mind of the speaker is engaged, otherwise, speech is restrained. When the mind is turned inward, it is active in a different way and is not anxious to speak. The purpose of a vow of silence is to limit the mental activities provoked by speech, but if the mind is controlled, this is unnecessary and silence becomes natural. Devotee asked, "How does activity help? Doesn't it simply increase the already heavy load upon us that we have to get rid of?" Bhagwan said, "Action performed unselfishly purifies the mind and helps it to fix itself in meditation." Devotee asked, "But suppose one were to meditate constantly without activity?" Bhagwan said, "Try and see. Your inherent tendencies will not let you. Meditation only comes step by step with their gradual weakening by the grace of the Guru." Devotee asked, "I have no pleasure in my family. There remains nothing for me to do there. I have done what has to be done, and now there are grandsons and granddaughters in the house. Should I remain there or should I leave it and go away?" Bhagwan said, "You should stay just where you are now. But where are you now? Are you in the house or is the house in you? Is there any house apart from you? If you become established in your own place, you will find that all things have merged into you, and such questions will become unnecessary." Devotee asked, "Then it seems I am to remain at home." Bhagwan said, "You are to remain in your true state." Devotee asked, "Can I engage in spiritual practice even while remaining in the life of the world?" Bhagwan said, "Yes, certainly one ought to do so." Devotee asked, "Is not life in the world a hindrance? Don't all the books advocate renunciation?" Bhagwan said, "The world is only in the mind. It doesn't speak out saying, 'I am the world.' If it did, it would have to be always present even in your sleep. Since it is not present in sleep, it is impermanent. But being impermanent, it has no reality. Having no reality, it is easily subdued by the self. The self alone is permanent. Renunciation is non identification of the self with the non self. On the disappearance of ignorance, the non self ceases to exist. That is true renunciation. Devotee asked, "Why then did you leave your home in your youth?" Bhagwan said, "That was my prarabdha, destiny. One's course of conduct in this life is determined by one's prarabdha. My prarabdha lies this way, your lies that way." Devotee asked, "Should I not also renounce?" Bhagwan said, "If that had been your prarabdha, the question would not have arisen." Devotee asked, "Then I take in that I should remain in the world and engage in spiritual practice. But if I do so, can I obtain realization in this life?" Bhagwan said, "This has already been answered. You are always the self. Earnest efforts never fails. Success is bound to result." Devotee asked, "Why is the world enveloped in ignorance?" Bhagwan said, "Look after yourself and let the world look after itself." What is yourself? If you are the body, there is a physical world also, but if you are the spirit, there is only spirit. Visitor said, "What do you think about social reform?" Bhagwan said, "Self reform automatically results in social reform. Attend to self reform, and social reform will take care of itself." Bhagwan said, "Now I will ask you a question. When a man gets into a train, where does he put his luggage?" Devotee said, "Either in the compartment or in the luggage van." Bhagwan said, "He doesn't carry it on his head or in his lap while in the train." Devotee said, "Only a fool would do so." Bhagwan said, "It is 1,000 times more foolish to bear your own burden once you have undertaken the spiritual quest, whether by the path of knowledge or devotion." Devotee asked, "But can I relinquish all my responsibilities, all my commitments?" Bhagwan asked, "You remember the temple tower? There are many statues on it, are not there? Well, there are four big ones at the base, one at each corner. Have you seen them?" Devotee said, "Yes." Then Bhagwan said, "Well, I tell you that the huge tower is supported by these four statues." Devotee asked, "How is that possible? What does Bhagwan mean?" Bhagwan said, "I mean that to say that is no more foolish than saying that you bear all the cares, burdens, and responsibilities of life. The Lord of the universe bears the whole burden. You only imagine that you do. You can hand over all your burdens to Him. Whatever you have to do, you will be made an instrument for doing it at the right time. Do not imagine that you cannot do it unless you have the desire to. It is not desire that gives you the necessary strength. The strength is the Lord's." Devotee asked, "Will Bhagwan give his opinion on the future of the world as we are living in critical times?" Bhagwan said, "Why should you worry about the future? You don't even know the present properly. Take care of the present and the future will take care of itself." Devotee asked, "Will the world sooner enter a new era of friendliness and mutual help, or will it go down in chaos and war?" Bhagwan said, "There is one who governs the world, and it is his task to look after it. He who has given life to the world knows how to look after it, so he bears the burden of this world, not you." Devotee said, "Yet if one looks round with unprejudiced eyes, it is hard to see where this benevolent care comes in." Bhagwan said, "As you are, so in the world, so is the world. Without understanding yourself, what is the use of trying to understand the world?" This is a question that seekers after truth need not worry about. People waste their energy over all such questions. First, find out the truth behind yourself. Then you will be in a better position to understand the truth behind the world of which you are a part. Another visitor asked Bhagwan for a benedictory forward to a book he had written called The Destiny of the Freedom or something of that sort. He said that someone else had already agreed to write an introduction, but he would be grateful if Bhagwan would write a few words conveying his message and blessing. Bhagwan explained to him that he had never done such a thing and therefore should not be expected to now. The visitor persisted, and I went to some trouble to convince him that all his persuasion would be in vain. Then he began saying that the world badly needs a spiritual message and that the youth of India and of the world are not properly brought up, since religion is not instilled into them, and so forth. I had to tell him that Bhagwan holds that before a man tries to reform the world, he should first know himself, and then he can go about reforming the world if he still feels so inclined. I believe the visitor was for continuing the argument, but fortunately it was time for the pranayam recital of the Vedas, and he was effectively stopped thereby. Devotee asked, should I try to help the suffering world? Bhagwan said, the power that created you created the world as well. If God created the world, it is his business to look after it, not yours. Devotee asked, but we see pain in the world. A man is hungry. It is a physical reality. It is very real to him. Are we to call it a dream and remain unmoved by his suffering? Bhagwan said, from the point of view of jnana or reality, the suffering you speak of is certainly a dream, as is the world of which that suffering is an infinitesimal part. In a dream you have, when you are asleep, you yourself feel hunger and see others also suffering from hunger. You feed yourself and, moved by pity, feed the others who are hungry. So long as the dream lasted, all this suffering was quite as real as the suffering you see in the world is to you now. It was only when you woke up that you discovered it to be unreal. You might have eaten heartily before going to sleep, but you still dreamt that you had been working hard in the hot sun all day and were tired and hungry. Then you woke up and found that your stomach was full and that you had not stirred from your bed. But all this is not to say that while you are in the dream, you can act as if the suffering you feel in it is not real. The hunger in the dream has to be appeased by dream food. The fellow beings you find hungry in the dream have to be provided with dream food. You can never mix the two states, the dream and the waking state. Similarly, till you attain the state of realization and thus wake out of this illusory phenomenal world, you must do social service by relieving suffering whenever you see it, but even so, you must do it without ahankara, that is, without the sense of it is I, who am I doing it. Instead, you should feel I am the Lord's instrument. Similarly, you must not be conceited and think I am helping a man who is below me. He needs help and I am in a position to give it. I am superior and he is inferior. You must help him as a means of worshipping God in him. All such service is serving the self, not anybody else. You are not helping anybody else but only yourself. Devotee asks, is it not our duty to be patriots? Bhagwan said, is it your duty to be and not to be this or that? I am sums up the whole of the truth. The method is summarized in be still. Devotee asks, is the desire for Swaraj, independence, right? Bhagwan said such desire no doubt begins with self interest, yet practical work for the goal gradually widens the outlook so that the individual becomes merged in the country. Such merging of the individuality is desirable, and the karma in the question is nishkam, unselfish. Devotee asked if self government for India is granted after a long struggle and terrible sacrifice, is one not justified in being pleased with the result and elated by it. Bhagwan said, in the course of one's work, one must have surrendered oneself to the higher power, whose might must be kept in mind and never lost sight of. How then can be elated? One should not even care for the result of one's action, then alone the karma becomes unselfish. Gandhiji has surrendered himself to the divine and works accordingly with no self interest. He doesn't concern himself with the results but accepts them as they turn up. That must be the attitude of national workers. Devotee asked, will the work be crowned with success? Bhagwan said, this question arises because the questioner has not surrendered himself. Then devotee asked, should we then not think of and work for the welfare of the country? Bhagwan said, first take care of yourself and the rest will naturally follow. Then devotee asked, I am not speaking individually but for the country. Bhagwan said, first surrender and then see. Doubts arise because of the absence of surrender. Acquire strength by surrender, and then your surrounding will be found to have improved to the degree of strength acquired by you. Devotee asked, why doesn't Sri Bhagwan go about preaching the truth to the people at large? Bhagwan said, how do you know that I don't? Does preaching consist in mounting a platform and the people around? Preaching is simple communication of knowledge and can be done in silence too. What do you think of a man listening to a language for an hour and going away without being impressed by it so as to change his life? Compare him with another who sits in a holy presence and leaves after some time with his outlook on life totally changed. Which is better, to preach loudly without effect, or to sit silently, sending forth intuitive force to act on others? Again, how does speech arise? First, there is a abstract knowledge unmanifest. From this, there arises the ego, which gives rise to thoughts and words successively. So then, words therefore are the great grandsons of the original source. If words can produce an effect, consider how much more powerful preaching through silence must be. Devotee asked, does my realization help others? Bhagwan said, yes, certainly. It is the best possible help, but really there are no others to help. For a realized being sees only the self, just as a goldsmith, estimating the gold in various wells, sees only the self, sees only the gold. Separate forms and beings exist only as long as you identify yourself with the body. When you transcend the body, others disappear along with your body consciousness. He asked, is it so with plants and trees also? Bhagwan said, do they exist at all apart from the self? Find out. You think that you see them. The thought is projected from yourself. Find out where from it arises. Then thoughts will cease to rise and the self alone will remain. Devotee asked, I understand theoretically, but they are still there. Bhagwan said, yes, it is like a cinema show. There is the light on the screen and the shadows flitting across impress the audience as the acting of some story. Now suppose that in this film, story and audience is also shown on the screen. The seer and the seen will then both be on the screen. Apply this to yourself. You are the screen. The self has created the ego. The ego has its accretions of thought, which are displayed as the world, trees, plants, etc., about which you are asking. In reality, all these are nothing but the self. If you see the self, it will be found to be all, everywhere and always. Nothing but the self exists. Visitor asked, they say that there are many saints in Tibet who remain in solitude and are still very helpful to the world. How can that be? Bhagwan said, it can be so. Realization of the self is the greatest help that can be rendered to humanity. Therefore, saints are said to be helpful even though they remain in the forests. But it should not be forgotten that solitude is not to be found in forest only. It can be had even in town in the thick of worldly occupation. Visitor asked, is not is necessary that saints should mix with people and be helpful to them. Bhagwan said the self alone is the reality, the world and the rest of it are not. The realized being doesn't see the world as different from himself. Visitor asked, then does that mean that a man's realization leads to the uplift of mankind without their being aware of it? Bhagwan said, yes, the help of imperceptible, but it is still there. A realized man helps the whole of mankind, although without their knowledge. Visitor asked, would not it be better if he mixed with others? Bhagwan said, there are no others to mix with. The self is the one and only real. Asked, if there were 100 self realized men, would not it be the great benefit of the world? Bhagwan said, when you say self, you refer to the unlimited, but when you add man to it, you limit the meaning. There is only one infinite self. Visitor asked, yes, I see. Sri Krishna said in the Gita that work must be performed without attachment, and such work is better than idleness. Is that karma yoga? Bhagwan said, what is set is adapted to the temperament of the listener. Visitor asked, in Europe, people do not understand that a man can be helpful in solitude. They imagine that only men who work in the world can be useful. When will this confusion cease? Will the European mind continue wading in the morass, or will it realize the truth? Bhagwan said, never mind about Europe or America. Where are they but in the mind? Realize yourself, and then all is realized. If you see a number of men in a dream and then wake up and recall your dream, you try to find out whether the persons of your dream creation are also awake. A self realized being cannot help benefiting the world. His very existence is the highest good. Hari Om Tat Sat.